Welcome to the New America Foundation. I'm Peter Bergen. It gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce my friend, Camille Tawil, who is one of the most distinguished journalists writing in the Arabic-speaking world, arguably globally. A long-time veteran reporter for al-Hayat who specializes in jihadi groups in the Middle East and North Africa. The author of this excellent book, Brother in Arms, The Story of Al-Qaeda and the Arab Jihadists. We booked this event some time ago, not realizing quite how topical it would be today. Camille has spent a lot of time reporting on Libya and other countries that are now in some state of chaos. And so he was going to focus on Libya, but also talk also more widely about the Middle East and what opportunities or lack there are for jihadi groups is going to be part of his presentation. So, over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's an honor to be here today at the New America Foundation. I would like to say thank you, and I would like also to say thank you to Andrew. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you all for coming. I would like to start my presentation with talking about Libya. Libya is the hottest issue now in the Middle East, and I think it will have implications, whatever happens in Libya, on the rest of the jihadi groups in the Middle East. Libya today represents a golden opportunity for turning the page between the United States of America and a large chunk of the jihadists who were accused until the very recent past of being part of al-Qaeda, something which I don't believe it's very true. Some of the jihadists indeed were part of al-Qaeda, but the majority was not part of al-Qaeda. And I think there was some confusion in putting all the jihadists in one basket after the attacks of 9/11, when the United States of America looked at all the jihadists who were based in Afghanistan as one and the same as al-Qaeda. Going back to the 1990s, the Libyan jihadists, who were represented mainly by the LIFG, the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, were very good friends with bin Laden. They were based in Afghanistan, and they had a very good relationship with bin Laden and al-Qaeda. But they were never part of al-Qaeda. They were invited to join bin Laden's global war on the West. But they turned that invitation down and refused to be part of al-Qaeda's war on the West. Instead, they wanted to focus on their local jihad, their jihad against Colonel Gaddafi's regime in Libya. It was not until 2007 that a part of the LIFG, the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, merged with al-Qaeda, when Abu al-Layth al-Libi announced in the summer of 2007 that his part of the LIFG was merging with al-Qaeda. And I don't believe that merger had any support from the rest of the leadership of the LIFG, which at that time was either the leaders were imprisoned in Libya or in exile in some Western countries. So that merger did not have the approval of the whole leadership of the LIFG. Only the section of the Libyan Fighting Group that was based in Afghanistan joined or merged with al-Qaeda, and they had no other choice but doing so. But Abu al-Layth al-Libi, who led that merger, was killed just a few months later in an air attack in Waziristan. Going back to today, I would see Libya as a test which, if successful, could lead to a more weakened al-Qaeda, which will lose the support of a large pool of possible jihadi recruits who will be feeling grateful to the US and the Western countries in helping them defend themselves from Gaddafi's regime. It was your intervention that saved them. But at the same time, if Libya descends into a full-fledged civil war, this would be a golden opportunity for al-Qaeda to build to regroup and open a base inside Libya. Al-Qaeda thrives in failed states or broken states. However, for the first time, the U.S. is not seen as siding with the aspiration. For the first time, the U.S. is seen as siding with the aspirations of the people of the Middle East, not their oppressors, the autocratic and repressive regimes that have been in power for decades. It was clear from the start that you were on the side of the people who were seeking change in Tunisia, then in Egypt, and now in Libya. But the quick fall of President Ben Ali in Tunisia and President Mubarak in Egypt was not repeated in Libya, where Colonel Gaddafi refused to go without a fight. So you had to pass the test of proving your support to the rebels and to the wishes of a large section of the Libyan society, in action, not only in words. In fact, you intervened at the right time, preventing a possible massacre in Benghazi, which was on the verge of being run over by Gaddafi's forces. America's intervention saved the rebellion from collapsing and may have swung the whole battle in their favor, in the favor of the rebels. And this is why I believe that your intervention could prove to be very useful in resolving the American government's long-running feud with the jihadists, or at least those jihadists who preferred a local jihad against their rulers, not the global jihad favored by bin Laden's Qaeda. The Libyan jihadists today see themselves as part of the rebellion against the Gaddafi regime. So it is expected that they also must feel some kind of gratitude to the American government, saving the whole rebellion from collapsing, and saving also the lives of hundreds, if not thousands, of Libyans who may have been killed by Gaddafi's troops were they to invade Benghazi. However, I'm not sure that all the jihadists will be grateful for your action. Some will for sure, others will not. The former, I believe, represent the majority of the Libyan jihadists, while the latter would mostly be those who are influenced by Al-Qaeda's message, and they will be a minority. Al-Qaeda's argument, as you well know, is that you only sided with the aspirations of the people of the Middle East because you knew that Ben Ali in Tunisia, Mubarak in Egypt, Gaddafi in Libya were no longer useful to your own cause, and this is why you switched sides from backing a dictatorship into backing the people of the Middle East. This is Al-Qaeda's argument. However, the majority of the Libyan jihadists, especially the mature ones, not the very young, who are very influenced by Al-Qaeda's message, and I'll explain that in a minute, appear to have a different approach. They seem to have learned a lot from their past mistakes. They learned from their failed attempt to topple Gaddafi in the mid-1990s. They also learned from the mistakes made by Al-Qaeda and its franchises in the way that killing civilians would backfire on your cause, even if these civilians who are killed were Muslim people or Westerners. By the mature jihadists, I'll explain. I specifically mean the leaders of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, the LIFG. Most of these leaders were freed from prison in Libya in the past couple of years after issuing a revision of their ideology under the title of the corrective studies. If you remember, they issued about 2 years ago some kind of revision to their ideology, and in which they criticized some actions carried out by Al-Qaeda as being against the true Islamic faith. They also went on to say to the peoples of the Middle East that they should not rise and take up arms against the regimes in the Middle East. This advice, they were criticized heavily by other jihadists who refused this advice and said this is a sell-out to Gaddafi's wishes. However, soon after the start of the Libyan uprising, many of the freed leaders and members of the al-IFG joined the rebellion. I understand that they argue that they cannot sit idle and see Gaddafi killing the ordinary Libyan civilians without taking action. This is why they had to be on the side of the people. When Gaddafi started killing these demonstrators in Benghazi and other places, they had an obligation to side with the people. So we've seen that the leaders of the al-IFG now are part of the rebellion itself, although they issued the corrective studies about 2 years ago, in which they said, no, we're not allowed to fight the regimes of the Middle East. However, I expect the leaders of the al-IFG to take a different policy from Al-Qaeda when or if Gaddafi's regime falls. I understand that they have no wishes of trying to dominate the new regime that will be established after the fall of Gaddafi. They know that they cannot do something like that. They also do not have the capability of doing so. But they seem genuinely convinced that they should not force their opinion on others. From talking to these al-IFG jihadists, they tell me that all they want is freedom of speech in Libya. This is all they want. If the new government offers them this freedom to preach their ideology, you disagree with it or agree with it, they would be happy to work within any new regime that will give them the freedom to preach. I think in the past years, which brought the leaders of the al-IFG failures and imprisonment, these past years have taught them a lesson. They represent only a section of the society, and therefore they cannot force their opinion on the rest of the Libyan society. This is very different because in the 1990s, the al-IFG tried to hijack the whole Libyan society in trying to topple Gaddafi, and as if they were the only representatives of the Libyan society. They have learned their lesson. They know that they cannot claim to represent the whole Libyan society. They are only a part of the society. If they are genuine in what they tell me, then this would be a great news, not only to the new government that will be formed after the fall of Gaddafi, but also to the West, which has been for years fearing these jihadists as one and the same as Al-Qaeda. So Libya could prove to be a very good experiment in how to incorporate the jihadists within a democratic regime. Will it work? How will it work? We'll see. Just a point here, because we're talking about the jihadists in a new environment. If we look at the Egyptian jihadists, such as the Jama'ah Islamiyya, the Islamic group, we've seen them also issuing revisions in the past years. But now, with the fall of Mubarak regime, they announced that they would like to form a political party and even contest elections. This is great news. It would be the first time you see jihadists who were arguing for years that only force can be used to change the regimes in the Middle East. You will see them now contesting elections, not only contesting elections against secular parties, they are contesting elections against other Muslim groups, such as the Moderate Muslim Brotherhood or even the Salafis, as we see in Egypt. It's very interesting to see the jihadists becoming part of this political multi-party system in any country. But for these jihadists to change now and accept to be part of a multi-party system in their countries is something that should be followed with great interest. I'm not sure yet if the al-IFG would follow the steps of the Egyptian Islamic group. I don't know if they will form a party and contest new elections in Libya. But as I said, I understand from talking to them, they would be happy to work under any government that is elected freely by the Libyan people. You know, just a short point here. The jihadists, you know, have been saying that they want to apply the Islamic law in the Muslim countries. I don't know how they will deal with the situation if it comes that the new regime in the new government elected in Libya will not enforce the Islamic law. I think they will not be happy, but they will not at the same time try to spoil the work of the new government in Libya. Talking about Libya again, hundreds of Islamists were freed in the past 2 years as a result of the peace talks with the al-IFG leadership. But some of the young jihadists who were freed, along with the al-IFG members, do not know much about what the al-IFG did against Gaddafi in the 1990s. They were very young to remember, and these young jihadists were more influenced by the ideology of Al-Qaeda, by the Iraq war, more than being influenced by the al-IFG's ideology. Some of these young jihadists wanted to fight in Iraq. Some managed to do that. Others wanted to go, but they were arrested before going. So from among the hundreds, around 1,000 jihadi were freed in Libya in the past 2 years. Not all of them follow the ideology of the al-IFG. They are not very mature. Some are very enthusiastic and influenced by the Al-Qaeda ideology. And I think, you know, that I would argue that there is some danger in the future that some of these young men may decide to join Al-Qaeda and help it build a base inside Libya, especially if in the case that Libya descends into a civil war. In fact, Al-Qaeda has not featured heavily in any of the current uprisings in the whole of the Middle East. However, there is a chance that it could benefit from these uprisings, especially after the dismantling of the feared internal security agencies in Egypt and Tunisia. What could make matters worse is if Libya descends into a full-blown civil war, which appears to be the case today. Al-Qaeda thrives in failed states that are going through a violent time. So Libya could be a golden opportunity for Al-Qaeda to build a presence there and gain access to weapons. Having said that, until now, Al-Qaeda's appeal to the Libyan rebels does not appear to be strong. The majority of the rebels, including the jihadists, will be on the opposite side of Al-Qaeda. If not welcoming foreign soldiers on the ground, they at least will feel some kind of gratitude to the help offered by the West against Gaddafi. Where does Al-Qaeda branch in North Africa, AQIM, fit in this picture? What is sure until today is that AQIM has not featured very heavily in the Libyan uprising. They support it for sure, but do not want to hijack it. Talking to one of the leaders of the AQIM, they said, you know, we clearly do not want to dictate on the Libyans what to do. We support them in any way possible, but we do not want to hijack their uprising against Gaddafi. But the Algerian security agencies have been making lots of noise about Al-Qaeda, AQIM, gaining access to sophisticated weapons, including missiles, from Libyan armed depots in eastern Libya. Whether this is true or not, I honestly I'm not privy to information, but I believe the president of Chad has publicly supported the Algerian accusations that Al-Qaeda has been able to get its hands on weapons in Libya. This would influence the situation in Algeria greatly. Algeria borders Libya, and if Al-Qaeda gains a base in Libya, it would be easier for it to send its fighters through the long borders with Algeria. Until today, as you know, the AQIM has been forced from operating in the north of Algeria to the Sahara, to the Sahel region in Mali and Niger. If the situation continues as it is now in Libya, a civil war, then there is a good opportunity for Al-Qaeda to move from the Sahel region back to the north, to the populated areas in North Africa. I'll end with 2 points. Libya could indeed revive Al-Qaeda's activities in North Africa after being forced to work for years in the Sahel region, far away from the populated areas in the Algerian cities and mountains. The danger of such a scenario would increase if Libya sinks into a long civil war. The second point, we are likely to see two kinds of jihadists after the fall of Gaddafi. One kind will favor working peacefully in the new Libya under any government chosen in free elections, while others will reject this approach and join Al-Qaeda. Let us hope that we don't see Libya descend into a long civil war, because this will benefit definitely Al-Qaeda. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Camille. Just a quick couple of questions, and then I'll throw it open to the audience. Point of clarification: when the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group issued this sort of what was the
corrective studies?
Corrective studies. My impression was that they may have rejected Al-Qaeda's ideology, but they didn't really refer to Al-Qaeda itself in this document, right?
They never mentioned Al-Qaeda in name, but if you read all the criticism of the excessives that are carried out by jihadi groups in the name of jihad, it was clearly meant that it was Al-Qaeda and the franchises of Al-Qaeda, especially its franchise in Iraq, the killing of civilians, the bombing of markets, all these things that al-IFG leaders named in their document to say that some jihadi activities are carried out in the name of jihad, but they are not related to jihad, is thought to mean Al-Qaeda's activities.
Do you have a sense from talking to them why they didn't just say Al-Qaeda's wrong about this? Or
they never mentioned anything, even when they renounced violence against regimes. They did not name Gaddafi's regime. They did not want to be cornered into saying this applies only to a certain situation, Afghanistan or Libya or Egypt or Gaddafi. They want it to be very general, that applies at any time, not at a certain point of time, because, as I said, they tried to give the impression that it's an argument that is plausible at any time,
right,
not with a specific situation.
Do you think that they regret having done essentially a deal with the Gaddafi regime? I mean, there does seem to be a sort of quid pro quo there if they're saying that popular revolutions are not to be encouraged. This was a deal for them. A number of them got out of prison once they'd signed onto this document or signed it or agreed to it.
I think, I'm not sure if they regret that specific thing. I'm sure some of them would have regretted being seen as very reconciling with Gaddafi. I also talked to some former al-IFG leaders who were saying that even the reconciliation with Gaddafi was meant as just to help them pass a period of time until the circumstances change. Then they will have a different opinion. I myself
is that similar to the, if the circumstances change, these jihadists who says that they're going to be happy when there's an elected government? I mean,
look, this is very curious, because I think Egypt is very similar to the situation in Libya. The Al-Jama'ah al-Islamiyya, the Islamic group in Egypt, was very clear that opposing the regime violently is not permissible. They made a deal with the regime in Egypt. However, after Mubarak fell, some of the leading members of the Al-Jama'ah al-Islamiyya have gone publicly saying, no, we did this deal because the circumstances forced us into doing so. And so we're no longer confined with what we did during Mubarak's regime. We are permitted to work in a different way. Other leaders of the Islamic group said, no, we've made a commitment, no more going back to violence. And there is an internal debate within the Islamic group of Egypt today, with some people saying, no, the circumstances have changed and we need to take a different course. Others say, no, what we did applies to all times. There is no return to violence. And I think the majority of the Islamic group in Egypt would still favor being part of a peaceful political scene in Egypt today. But others may be may tend to follow Al-Qaeda's argument and even join in some violent actions. But the majority will stick to their promises and stay working peacefully.
Yeah, one of the most puzzling developments is Saif al-Islam, Saif Gaddafi. After all, he was the guy who negotiated this essentially ceasefire agreement between the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group and his father. And was spending time in London, famously got a PhD that he may not have written at LSE. What has happened to him? I mean, why did he, because a number of the, Noman Ben Othman, who's a friend of yours and somebody that I know, who was a leader of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, had a pretty high opinion of Saif al-Islam. And this was shared throughout the leadership of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, that he was a guy who was not as crazy as his dad and somebody you could kind of do business with. Obviously, their views must have changed, right?
To be quite frank, if you look at the reforms introduced by Saif al-Islam, they are great. Even the opposition people would want to enforce or to work within these reforms. But what happened is that I think Saif al-Islam rushed into saying things at the start of the revolution that upset a lot of people who were supporting his reforms. So you had many people who were part of his reform agenda inside Libya taking a very strong action against him. Not against his reforms, but against him as a person. They saw him now as part of his father's regime. Noman is one of these people. I think he was working very closely with Mr. Saif al-Islam in achieving these corrective studies and reforms within Libya. I know he must have been upset with Saif al-Islam's policies now. A lot of people have.
What were the substance of Saif al-Islam's reforms? Because other than the corrective studies, I'm not aware of what else was he.
He worked on so many different levels. He opened the press. In Libya, you did not have a free press. What he did, he introduced newspapers, online magazines that allowed other opinion than his father's Green Book opinion to be circulated within Libya. This created a lot of tension with the hardliners in the regime. But in the end, Saif was able to allow Libyans to express themselves in a free way. Other things, he pushed a lot to free prisons from prisons from political prisoners. He wanted more freedoms to create societies. He worked in so many ways, really genuine reforms. I'm sure he was hoping that these reforms would help him succeed his father if Colonel Gaddafi decides to retire. And this is why maybe he rushed into saying big things at the start of the revolution, because he felt betrayed by the people who were supporting his reforms. But at the same time, these people were upset because of his strong words against the people who revolted against his father.
Let's throw it open to questions. If you have a question, just raise your hand and identify yourself, and we have a microphone.
Christopher Blanchard from the Congressional Research Service. I was wondering if you could say a bit more about Algeria and the supposed split between northern and southern AQIM fighters and implications for the change in the emergency law and the sort of inter-regime politics that are going on between the military and the DRS. Thanks.
Okay. AQIM was defeated militarily in Algeria. The Algerian intelligence services made great work in confronting AQIM, especially after it became AQIM, the franchise in North Africa. If you remember, in 2007, AQIM carried out two big campaigns, suicide campaigns in Algiers itself. However, the Algerian intelligence was able to know who these cells were in Algeria and defeated a whole, a big chunk of AQIM operating in Algiers and the surrounding areas. This came at the same time when the Algerian military was putting a lot of pressure on the bases of AQIM just east of Algiers. What this did lead to, it led to AQIM moving to the Sahara, to the unruled vast lands in Niger and Mali, and even in Mauritania. So the whole work of AQIM was concentrated in the Sahel region. There were no governments to track them because of the vast lands. They made some pacts with some tribes in northern Mali, and they benefited a lot financially from the trade of kidnapping Western hostages. Now, with the situation in Libya, as I said in my paper, if it continues into a full-blown civil war, Al-Qaeda may be tempted into moving back from the Sahel to the northern regions in North Africa. Because in the end, the war can be won or lost in Algeria, not in Mali and Niger. If Al-Qaeda is able to move its fighters from the Sahel to Libya, then the Algerian situation could change drastically, especially if Al-Qaeda, AQIM, is able to gain access to weapons from Libyan army depots and are able to move these weapons back to the mountains in Algeria. Then you will see more and more attacks in Algeria itself. Going back to the reforms within the regime, I believe they understand that they cannot stop change. They must do these reforms to please their population, and very quickly. The lifting of emergency law will happen. Whether, President Bouteflika announced it in the whole of the country, apart from Algiers itself. I don't know if they will lift it in Algiers itself, but change must happen. As I said earlier yesterday in my paper at Jamestown Foundation, the Algerians might be tempted into hoping at least Gaddafi stays in power for some time. If Libya descends into civil war, the Algerian government will tell its own population that, look at Libya as an example. If the people would like to repeat the kind of uprising in Algeria as we saw in Libya, then we could be heading into a civil war like Libya. Would you like a repeat of what happened in the 1990s with thousands of people dying? I think this will be an argument by the Algerian government to tell its own people, the frustrated people, that reform can be achieved in other ways than starting a rebellion.
Lady over here. Yep.
you. Lorraine Bartlett from the Department of Defense. Sir, most of us are pretty familiar with the wholesale, the brand name al-Qaeda. You continue to refer to AQIM. Could you define that? And could you also explain to us, you're using the term jihadis as kind of a, I don't know, generic version of freedom fighter or rebel. When you continually refer to jihadis, are you in fact kind of using that as a generic term for all of the other resistance movements? Or is there a subcategory of jihadis that are not the rebels? Can you just define a couple of the terms for us, please? Thank you.
And as a factual matter, what's your, Camille, what is the strength of AQIM right now?
AQIM is the franchise of Al-Qaeda organization in North Africa. Before it changed its name into AQIM, the Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, it used to be called the Salafist group for preaching and jihad, Al-Jama'a Salafiyya in Algeria. It's a jihadi organization that it used to fight the Algerian government throughout the 1990s. In 2004, one of the leaders of the GSPC, the Salafist group in Algeria, was arrested in Chad. And the leaders of the Algerian group got in touch with Zarqawi in Iraq. They asked him for help. They said, can you help us free that our leader in Chad? If you can kidnap French citizens in Iraq and put pressure on the Chadian rebels to free our man. And he said, I would be happy to do that. But by the time he was able to do, and before he was able to do, Zarqawi be able to do anything, the Chadian rebels handed over that man to the Libyan intelligence, which handed him over to the Algerians. But this is how the process of the transformation from being GSPC in Algeria into AQIM in North Africa. Zarqawi asked them, I would be happy to help you, but at the same time he said, follow my steps. I became the Al-Qaeda franchise in Iraq. You can start becoming Al-Qaeda franchise in North Africa. And this is how it happened. In 2007, late 2006, Zawahiri endorsed the GSPC. In January 2007, it became officially GSPC, changed their mind into AQIM, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, the official franchise in North Africa. And as in terms of jihadists, all the people who take up arms to fight the regimes in the Middle East, they are known as jihadists. Some people argue that it's a wrong term calling these jihadists because jihad has a different meaning from killing people or killing soldiers or whatever. But these people consider themselves as jihadists, whether they are Algerian jihadists, the GSPC, or AQIM, or the al-IFG, the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group in Libya. Even in Egypt, the Islamic group, the Al-Jama'a al-Islamiyya, consider themselves as jihadists. So when I use the term jihadists, I mean the people who take up arms against their governments to change them in order to change them. About the strength of AQIM, as I said, AQIM, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, was defeated in Algeria. Militarily, they cannot do anything big. They still have some bases, just in Tizi Ouzou and Bjaya, the regions bordering Algiers to the east. They killed last week 14 soldiers, I believe, in one ambush. They can still inflict damage to the Algerian army. But can they change the regime in Algeria? They are no longer able to do that. In the 1990s, they had the jihadists. In the beginning, they were the armed Islamic group, and then the GSPC. They had hundreds of fighters fighting the Algerian government, and they were not able to change, to topple the government. Now, I believe they have few hundred fighters, especially concentrating in the Sahel region. In Algiers, it's in Algeria itself, maybe they have 200, 300 fighters. It's a guess, but they are not able to influence the situation greatly inside Algeria.
Yeah, there's a certain school of thought that AQIM became an al-Qaeda affiliate more as a sign of its weakness rather than its strength.
Look, what happened by the end of the 1990s, the Algerian government defeated the jihadists. In the beginning, they defeated the GIA, then they defeated GSPC. They couldn't match the Algerian security forces' power. And the Algerian government was gaining, killing lots of them, dismantling their cells. Not even that. What they did, the Algerian government, was very clever. They started a peace initiative towards the Islamists. They said, any people who are willing to join the peace process, we will give them amnesty. Lay down your arm and you're welcome to join the society again. Some people did. In addition to this, lots of prominent religious figures from the Gulf region, the Salafis, came to Algeria saying, no, what these jihadists are doing is against Islam. It's not jihad you are doing. Fighting the Algerian government is not jihad. And this also helped reduce the influence of the jihadists within Algeria. So by 2003, the jihadists were very weak. GSPC, the Islamic jihadi group that was still fighting the Algerian government, was very weak. Then America invaded Iraq, and lots of young people were encouraged to go and fight the jihad in Iraq. So it became a golden opportunity for the GSPC to revive its forces. It started helping these young Algerian men go to fight in Iraq. They said it's an obligation to go and fight an American occupation of Muslim lands in Iraq. So the American invasion of Iraq gave the GSPC a golden opportunity of stopping the decline it was witnessing in Algeria and starting to revive its forces. So between 2003 and 2007, GSPC was able to recruit more people in the beginning in the name of sending fighters to Iraq, but at a later stage it said, because the Algerian government is preventing you from participating in jihad in Iraq, you have the obligation of fighting the Algerian government too. So it gave GSPC the opportunity to relaunch its operations within Algeria.
Okay, in front here.
Hello, my name is Merve Seren. I'm from Turkish Parliament, and I'm just here for a legislative fellow currently in United States. And I just would like to hear your comments about what do you think about the Turkey's significance and role towards this transition process in the Middle East. And that's the AK Party, and sometimes I hear distrust about the AK Party here in the United States about for instance, our Prime Minister made a speech about Libya, and it was counted in one of the articles here that 27 times he said our brothers and brotherhoods. So how you comment this kind of the relationship between the Turkey and the Libya and the other countries as well?
Look, Libya has financial interest in Libya. I believe Erdogan has good relationship with Gaddafi and his sons. I honestly, I'm not Libyan, but I would support any process that would reduce the bloodshed in Libya. If the Turkish initiative will offer Gaddafi an exit, maybe not now, maybe in a few months' time, if this would lead to a reduction of bloodshed in Libya, I would support it. I know most of the rebels would oppose any opportunity to let Gaddafi escape without being punished. But I myself would support the Turkish initiative, and I would support Erdogan offering Gaddafi a way to leave power, if not now, in a few months' time.
And there's a specific reason why you would support Gaddafi going into exile, which is?
I would not like to see more bloodshed and destruction of Libya.
But beyond all that, it's to do with the tribal structure.
Yeah. Look, I would argue that in Libya, you are not fighting a one-man regime. It appears from the outside that Libya is ruled by one man. He decides everything. Any important order has to be sanctioned by Gaddafi. But in the end of the day, Gaddafi does not rule the country on his own. There is a complex map of tribal pacts that are still siding with Gaddafi. Gaddafi has his own tribe, the Qadatfa. He has also the support of another major tribe in Libya, which is the Magarha. He also has a pact with the Warfalla, with so many tribes. So my argument would be that if you want to offer Gaddafi, if you want him to go, you have to offer these tribes an incentive. That does not appear to be a humiliation to these tribes. That if Gaddafi goes, these tribes are not humiliated. It has to take into account that these tribes have influence and interest within the existing regime. So if a change is going to happen, give these tribes an incentive to switch sides, but not in a way that would offend these tribes and their culture. If these tribes have pacts with Gaddafi's tribe, it's very difficult to break these historic ties that date back to the dates of fighting the Italian colonialism in North Africa. So offer these tribes an incentive to get rid of Gaddafi in a way that appears not a humiliation to his own tribe.
Libya has a relatively small population, 6 million, and one of the largest tribes is the Warfalla tribe. What is their position right now, and how large are they?
The Warfalla tribe, as you said, they count around 1 million out of a population of 6.5 million. They are very strong. They are spread all over the country, including Benghazi in the east. But their main base is Beni Walid, just to the south of Tripoli. At the beginning of the uprising, many people said the Warfalla have switched sides and they are now with the rebels. If this was indeed true, Gaddafi would have been history by now. They could easily march from Beni Walid to Misrata and break the siege of the third biggest city in Libya. I believe they are still, if not supporting wholeheartedly Gaddafi, they are not with the rebels until now, because they fear the emergence of a new power in the east of Libya that will deprive them from the power they enjoy in Gaddafi's regime.
And what is that power based on?
Security forces, security and intelligence agencies. They are controlled, a large chunk of these intelligence agencies and security forces are run by the Warfalla.
Great, in front.
Hi, Michael Greenwald, U.S. Treasury. What will it take, do you think, for the tribes, in particular tribes, to support the TNC? And also, if I'm speaking with former LIFG, what is the LIFG's perspective on the current state of TNC?
Okay, so just repeat the question.
Okay.
Is that mic working? Can you go and get it fixed? Thanks.
What will it take the tribes to switch sides? I don't think you can buy them. Maybe you can. I honestly don't know. But as I said, if these tribes have invested interest in the current regime, and when they face a new regime emerging in the east, trying to deprive them of the posts they enjoy within the regime, I don't think it's only money. You cannot buy these tribes with money. These tribes have historic pacts with the Gaddafi tribe. So I think the incentive would be that allow Gaddafi to go without defeating his own tribe, the Gaddafi. You need to find someone within his own tribe that will replace him as head of the tribe. Point of interest here, Gaddafi belongs, as I said, to the Gaddafi tribe. But this Gaddafi tribe is split into many branches. And Gaddafi belongs to one of these branches, a small branch of the Gaddafi tribe. But in the end of the day, you have to offer the tribes that are still siding with the Gaddafi tribe an incentive that doesn't look a humiliation to his own tribe. The second question is about the al-IFG. Talking to the leaders to some of the leaders of the al-IFG, I think, as I said, if the new government in Libya allows them to operate freely, they will have no issue with it. They will work peacefully as long as they are allowed to preach their own ideology. Will this be translated into forming a political party and to contest elections? I still don't know. But there is an influx of jihadists to Libya now. They cannot sit idle when Gaddafi forces are killing civilians in Libya. I think they feel it's their obligation to join the rebellion against Gaddafi.
When you say influx, how many? How many are we talking about?
Maybe dozens.
I mean, from around the region, or just Libyans who are returning home, or?
One of the most important leaders of the al-IFG, his name is Arwa. Arwa is considered one of the best. He's a well-known al-IFG leader who was based in Iran. He was arrested in 2004 and by the Iranian intelligence and kept in prison until 2010. In the summer of 2010, the Iranian regime freed dozens of al-Qaeda members and leaders and other jihadists who were put in the same compounds in different locations in Iran. These people, some of these people who were freed, including bin Laden's family, went back to Afghanistan and Waziristan. Others went to different countries. Arwa, the important member of the al-IFG, he was implicated in many assassination attempts of Gaddafi in the 1990s. Arwa decided to go back to Libya. He went back just at the start of the Libyan uprising, and he was one of the leaders of the rebellion in the east of the country. He died last week in an ambush by the Gaddafi troops between Ajdabia and Brega in the east of the country. So the al-IFG people feel it's their obligation to go and join the rebellion.
Here.
Hamid, USMC Operational Culture Advisor. I would like to hear a little bit about the head of National Council, the former Justice Minister, that was sent to Benghazi actually to calm down the uprising, correct? And what is his, how would you describe him? How close is he from the Islamists?
Look, he's a moderate Islamist. He belongs to a tribe in the east of Libya, but he is well respected. Mustafa Abdi Jalil, the leader of the Transitional Council in Benghazi, is widely respected by the Libyan people. He is not corrupt. He's never been seen as a corrupt person. He's a decent person, and people respect him for that. However, he has a problem. He does not seek power. He does not want to replace Gaddafi as head of Libya. This creates a problem, because if the leader of the Transitional Council does not seek power, then the people around him will be competing to replace him. But there is also a problem, a wider problem here. Does the Transitional Council really represent the people who are demonstrating or the rebellion in Libya? Unless we have proper elections to see who the people decide as their leaders, we cannot say the Transitional Council really represent the rebellion. Apart from Mr. Abdi Jalil, which I believe he has wide support among the rebels and the general public in Libya, I think it's open to question whether the rest of the Transitional Council members have any real representation of the people of Libya. Only elections will decide if these people really represent the rebels or not. But Mustafa Abdi Jalil himself is widely respected, and I think he would, even if he decides to run for elections, he would be chosen by a large section of the Libyan population.
Hi, I'm Adam Schatz from the London Review of Books. I'm wondering what gives you confidence that a strong Western backing would win the hearts and minds of the LIFG. The example of American support for the Mujahideen is not exactly encouraging.
Good question. From talking to the LIFG leaders, as I said, they have become, I believe, mature enough to understand that they cannot dictate what goes on in Libya. They only represent a section of the Libyan society. So if they see the Americans and the rest of the West intervening to save Libyan lives, I honestly believe they will appreciate what the West has done. Some people would be very cynical. They would say, why now? Why not in the past? Why in the past you used to hand over the Islamists to Gaddafi's regime or other dictators in the Middle East? It's an open question. But from talking to the LIFG leaders, I have the feeling that they have become mature enough to understand that in the future, if freedom is given by the new government, then they will be happy to work within that government without causing it any headache.
I have Todd Pierce, Department of Defense. I just read recently that British Petroleum is now being said to have pushed the British government to get into the Iraq War back in 2003, or actually about 5 months beforehand. So why won't facts like that be exploited, building on the last question, to create suspicion, cynicism, or perhaps be used by Gaddafi to argue that it's the West just trying to grab the oil? And how is that going to affect the situation in Libya and the people's hearts and minds, so to speak?
Look, Gaddafi is trying to spread this propaganda that the West is only after the Libyan oil. What gives an incentive to this idea is that it's very normal that Western countries or any country would look after their own interest. If the interest of Western countries lay in a different regime than the Gaddafi regime, why not? And you've seen this just at the beginning of the uprising in Libya. Britain and France competing who will take the lead role in supporting the rebels in eastern Libya. The British sent a team of SAS diplomats secretly to eastern Libya. At the same time, they wanted maybe to be the first to open contacts with the rebels. The French, they were quick just after that failure of sending the British team to Libya. They accepted the Libyan Transitional Council as the representative of the Libyan people. So there is this idea of Western countries trying to open contacts with the rebels because they want future contracts, including in the oil industry.
Camille, just to switch topics briefly, I mean, you've thought a lot about Syria. What do you see happening there, and how it will play out over the next several months? And are there any analogies that can be drawn with Libya in terms of offering Assad a way out if things get worse for him?
Look, I think Libya is very important today, because if Gaddafi is able to stop the wave of change in the Middle East, then other dictatorships in the region will try to emulate what Gaddafi did in Libya. That if this leads into civil war, some countries might be tempted into going into repeating that. In terms of Syria, I think Syria is a little bit different from Libya and North Africa. In North Africa, you have the Sunnis who form the population in the whole of North Africa. From Libya to Morocco, it's the Maliki branch of Islam that is considered the official branch of Islam. In Egypt, it's the Shafi'i branch of Islam, but they are all Sunnis. In Syria, it's different. In the whole of the Levant, it's totally different, because Syria, you have a majority of Sunnis, but you have the ruling Alawites. And if you look back to the 1980s, the Alawites killed thousands of Sunnis in the uprising of the Muslim Brotherhood in 1982. They went to Hama and just flattened large section of the city, killing hundreds, if not thousands, of Sunnis. So there is a danger now that the Sunnis will try to take revenge from the Alawites who oppressed them in the 1980s. So there is a very strong fear that Syria could descend into a civil war different from the civil war we're seeing in Libya. It's a sectarian strife between the Sunnis and the Alawites. In Iraq, we nearly saw that with the Zarqawi killing Shia and bombing the Samarra mosque, and we saw the retaliation by the Jaysh al-Mahdi killing Sunnis, and we nearly had a full-blown sectarian war in Iraq. I wouldn't wish to see Syria going in the same road as we nearly saw in Iraq, but there is the potential that the uprising in Syria could become a sectarian war between Sunnis and Alawites.
Hi, my name is Omar Amash. I'm a contractor at the State Department. Do you worry that the NATO intervention could radicalize others outside of Libya? Even though the Libyan population might be grateful, others outside of Libya might see it differently. I've seen criticism in some of the Pakistani press, the Egyptian press. Some are use it against Amr Moussa, who's now running for president, arguing that he brought war to Egypt's borders. So what are your thoughts on that?
And as a follow-up to that, can you, if there had been no intervention in Libya, what would have that meant for the region?
Look, talking to the jihadists, they don't want to see foreign troops in Libya. Talking to them, they have been critical of some members of the Transitional Council who said they would welcome foreign troops in Libya in the circumstances we're seeing today, especially in Misrata. They say some members of the Transitional Council have advocated that foreign troops can come to Libya. The jihadists do not want to see that. This is in terms of Libya itself. On the wider region, it's different from one region to another. Looking at the situation in Libya, if you look at the Algerians would be upset to see the French planes bombing Libya. Just from a historical point of view, the Algerians remember when the French planes were hitting their rebels, the FLN people who were fighting for their independence in the 1950s and 60s. So it is still in the memory of the Algerian old people, seeing that the French were bombing us. So automatically they would be hostile to the idea of French planes bombing Libyans, even if the dead people were from the Gaddafi side. But in the end, some people would be upset to see the French bombing Libya. And you're right, some sections of the Muslim population across the world, especially in maybe Malaysia, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, will feel very hostile to the idea of foreign troops bombing a Muslim land. Even they wouldn't see it as siding with the rebels against Gaddafi, but just the idea of seeing Western planes bombing a Muslim country would not be something welcomed by many sections of the Muslim population in the world.
What about if there'd been no intervention at all?
You know, this is why I said in the beginning that the jihadists would be feeling gratitude to the West. They cannot not feel it. They wouldn't be ordinary citizens if they would object to the West intervening when Gaddafi's tanks were approaching Benghazi. There would have been a massacre. So even the jihadists who are not very happy for foreign troops to intervene in a Muslim land, they must be feeling some kind of gratitude. But this creates a dilemma. Why would the West be welcomed to intervene in Libya, in a Muslim state, and not be welcomed to intervene in Afghanistan and Iraq? You know, it's the same situation. In Iraq, there could be an argument, although, you know, the weapons of mass destruction and the links with al-Qaeda distorted the whole thing, but it's the same argument that the West is trying to help the Iraqi people getting rid of Saddam. But this was rejected by all the people in the Middle East, the great majority. Why would the West's intervention in Libya be welcomed and be rejected at the same time in Afghanistan and Iraq? This is a dilemma, but in the end, I believe the great majority of the Libyans, including the jihadists, would feel gratitude to the West saving the rebellion from collapsing and saving Libyan lives too.
Seems to be an argument against Western boots on the ground in Libya you're making.
No, because I spoke to some influential people within the Libyan jihadists, and they said it's out of the question. But in the end, the jihadists do not represent the whole rebellion. The rebels in Libya come from all across the Libyan population. You have the jihadists, you have the ex-military, you have the tribes, you have different people. And the jihadists, who are very committed and very willing to fight, they only represent a section of the rebellion. They do not represent, they are not the biggest chunk of the rebels. And this is, I think, you know, what the French and the British and the Italian are trying now to control, that if we are to give weapons to the rebels, we need to know who these people are. And this is why we've seen teams of military officers coming from Britain and France and maybe, I'm not sure, Italy. They are going to Benghazi just to organize the rebellion, and at least they would know that if weapons are given to the rebels, they would know who these rebels are.
Let's just take a bunch of questions here and see if you can answer them in rapid fire.
Dan Lieberman. You started off mentioning the reason for the retribution against Libya, that it was due to the fact that Gaddafi seemed from statements to want to take revenge on hundreds of thousands of people. But yet when I read Gaddafi's statement, what he really said was, we will go door to door, and those who have arms, we will take revenge against. And he added that those who flee and do not fight, do not fire upon them. It also seems odd for a military coming into a rebellion and telling the people, hundreds of thousands of them, that we're going to take a revenge on you. That's sure a way for them to take up arms. And I doubt if Gaddafi has more than about 2,000 forces. There's no way that the Gaddafi limited forces could take any revenge on the people. So what I'm saying really is this statement true? It seems to me Gaddafi is saying the other. As long as you don't fight against us, there will be no retribution. And those who could possibly take arms are only a few hundred. So I don't see where this massive retribution, revenge can come against.
Okay, so one question about sort of Gaddafi's, the possibility of Gaddafi's revenge.
He made it very clear, although, if you're trying to interpret what he said, that, it doesn't mean killing of hundreds, if not thousands of Libyan, it looked very strong. It really looked very scary, the way he said it. He said, these are rats, we're going from one house to another to get rid of you. It was very scary, and I'm sure hundreds of people, if not thousands, would have been killed by Gaddafi. But Gaddafi made a big mistake. He did not, lots of mistakes. One of the mistakes he did was not believing that the West will intervene militarily against him. He never thought that the West will come and bomb him. The second thing, he made a mistake in not moving his forces very quickly. He had hundreds, thousands of fighters who were in reserve in Sabha and the region where the Magarha are very strong in the south of Libya. He was very slow to move these troops into the east. This allowed the rebellion into becoming stronger and stronger. And so when he decided to get rid of the rebels and invade Benghazi, it was too late. Even though he was able to send tanks to Benghazi, the way he said it, he and his son, that we are going to get rid of all the people who carried out arms against us unless you lay down your arm and flee to Egypt, it was very scary. And I see the point of view that the West could not sit idle when you make such a threat to the Libyan rebels that you are going after them from one house to another and getting rid of them. So the West would have to intervene, otherwise you would have seen a massacre in the east of Libya.
Hello, Travis Owens, Department of Defense. Let me see if I can lay the question out and then correct me if the premises are wrong. But you have jihadis going into, say, Chechnya and Bosnia in the past who've tried to graft jihad onto the conflict. And so is that what's going on here when you're talking about the jihadists? Are these purely homegrown jihadists who are not really trying to turn this into a full-blown jihad war?
Okay.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, my understanding is that the people who went to Chechnya in the late 1990s, they went and beginning of the new the year 2000 and around that time frame. Most of these jihadists were defeated jihadists in their own country. You had three major jihadi uprisings in the Middle East in the 1990s, in Algeria, in Libya, and in Egypt. And in the three cases, the Libyan regime, the Egyptian regime, and the Algerian regime were able to defeat the insurgencies, the jihadists. So they had a dilemma. They cannot continue the fight inside their own country. So some of them relocated to Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, they had this big debate. Either you join bin Laden's invitation and become part of the global war against the West, or you choose another land in which to practice your jihad. Some people within these jihadi circles who were defeated in their own countries favored that, okay, we cannot go back and fight in Libya or Algeria or Egypt. Let's go into a different land and practice jihad. And Chechnya was, at that time it was invaded by the Russians, and people felt it was their obligation, or it was a good thing to go and participate in jihad. Nowadays, if you look at Libya, I spoke about jihadists going back to Libya because it's their obligation, it's their own land. I've seen reports, I've seen people saying Egyptians also moved to Libya and joined the rebellion. But I think we're talking about very little numbers of people. But in terms of the Libyans, I think they feel obliged to be part of the rebellion. They are not foreign from their own country. Some of these people return to Libya because it's their obligation to defend their own families and their own cities and towns in Libya. We're not talking about foreign jihadists going to Libya.
Todd Pierce again. Just hypothetically for the moment, let's assume that things aren't going to go all for the best. And remembering Ahmad Chalabi and how his assurances were that everything would go good in Iraq, people in France are suggesting that Sarkozy, did this for political reasons. He's, facing some troubles for re-election. So anyway, assuming for the moment that things don't go well and that there is a stalemate, or even that Gaddafi, begins getting the momentum, and people start saying that the West needs to get involved with troops on the ground and whatnot. And remembering Osama bin Laden stating numerous times his strategy for getting the West in the Mideast so that he could do the same thing to them as was done to Russia, the Soviet Union in the 1980s, and our own economic troubles. What do you see happening if we do sort of a half-measured thing? We get involved, we put a few troops in, and gradually we begin to realize or think that, wait a minute, can we really afford this anymore? Do we really want to give up Medicare, for example? And public opinion turns against it, and you end up with just sort of a half-hearted Western intervention that maybe succeeds, but in the long term, what's going to be the consequences on public opinion in the Mideast and throughout that whole region?
As I said earlier, there is a chance Libya could descend into civil war. It all depends on how long Gaddafi can resist the situation we're facing today. If he manages to drag Libya into a civil war, then there could be implications to the whole region, not only AQIM. The whole situation will become different. Even if Gaddafi is defeated, as I said earlier, we're talking about tribes. His tribe or the tribes affiliated to his own tribe could cause a headache to the new government in Libya. You have to reach a deal with the tribes in Libya. Going back to France and why it intervened, I think it did so because the Qataris lobbied them into doing so. You only have to look back into what the French were trying to do in Tunisia a few months ago. When the people were demonstrating against President Ben Ali, the French government was offering his government, the Tunisian government, weapons or ways in order to combat the people who were demonstrating in the streets. In Egypt, the Prime Minister of France was being hosted by President Mubarak and given a private plane to go from one place to another in Egypt. So some people, some cynics would look at the French change of heart suddenly from backing dictatorships in the Middle East as President Ben Ali and Mubarak, into suddenly backing the rebels in Libya with some pinch of salt, as you say. I don't know if it makes any sense. They would say, you know, only weeks ago you were supporting dictatorships. Nowadays, suddenly you've become very supportive of the wishes of the ordinary Libyans. Sorry, I don't know if I answered your question properly.
It was Bernard Henry Levy who basically cooked up the whole thing, according to himself.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions? In back, and then just take these two questions together, and then we'll wrap it up.
Hello, my name's Mark McBride with Customs and Border Protection. And all the reporting seems to be about what's going on in the north part of Libya along the coast, where, of course, that's where the population is. But can you comment on what's occurring inland and to the south, and to what degree Libya is maintaining the integrity of its borders, especially in the south?
I think they have a problem.
We'll get another question. And we'll take them together.
Hi, Sarah Harlan from the Aspen Institute. Is the jihadist contingent seeking support from Islamic governments if they don't want Western troop boots on the ground?
Okay. On the ground, I think, you know, most of the people are concentrating on what's going on the eastern front between Brega and Ajdabia, and on what happens in Misrata. But there is another front that is really very active, but few people talk about, which is the borders with Tunisia. The western mountain, Al-Jabal al-Gharbi, it's the rebels are very active there, and I think they have even been able to create some presence on the Tunisian side of the border. This is my impression. You know, I don't have firm evidence to prove this, but I believe they must have been operating on the Tunisian borders and getting inside Libya from Tunis. And if you read the latest report this morning, I believe they have been able to take over one border crossing between Libya and Tunisia, which is very near to Nalut, just south of Tripoli, on the Tunisian borders. So they are very active also on the western front. As to the south of Libya, as you know, the south of Libya is very little populated. You don't have much people living there, but the south is occupied by tribes that are loyal to Gaddafi, especially the Magarha. Sabha is the place where most of the fighters in Gaddafi's troops come from. The whole region in the south seems still to be siding with Gaddafi's regime. As for the foreign jihadi brigades in Libya, as I said, you know, the jihadists would not like to see foreign troops coming to Libya. But at the same time, I'm not sure they are seeking help from Muslim countries. I believe some people were circulating the idea that the Egyptians could send some of their special forces to break the siege on Misrata. I'm not sure the jihadists are consulted on this, but I know this has been talked about, that instead of seeking foreign troops coming to Libya to help the rebellion, instead let's seek help from Muslim countries. And one of the countries that was looked into to see if they are able to help was Egypt and the Egyptian special forces. But Egypt does not want to say anything publicly because of fear of what could happen to the Libyan people who are still, to the Egyptian people who are still inside Libya. They fear reprisal from the Libyan regime against the Egyptians. I don't know if the Egyptians are backing the rebellion properly. Some people say they are offering help, but the Egyptians officially do not say anything about that.
before we thank Camille, I just want to make a small programming note. Tomorrow we're hosting General Farouk, who's a 3-star Pakistani general who runs the National Defense University, and also one of the deans of the National Defense University, to talk about Pakistan's strategic picture at 9:30, between 9:30 and 11, and people in this room are invited if they would like to sign up for it. And then at 3, we're hosting the Pakistani Foreign Secretary, who will be discussing the same issues. And given the importance today of the Pakistani-American relationship, or lack thereof, I think both will be pretty interesting. And with that, I'd like to thank Camille very much for that very illuminating talk.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Peter. Thank you.